A man met with his financial advisors over the state of his affairs. He informed them that over the next 6 months he would be off sailing around the world and would be unable to have any face-to-face meetings with them. And so to the first, most seasoned advisor, he entrusted a section of his holdings for management. To that advisor, he gave all of his Bitcoin, that newfangled electronic currency, and it was by far his most valuable asset, worth around $25 million. To the second advisor, he gave a highly diversified portfolio worth around $15 million. And to the third and the youngest advisor, a recent graduate of the Harvard Business School, he gave a set of real estate holdings worth around $5 million. And while he was away, the world turned upside down. And a band of computer hackers were able to get the codes of about a third of the world's Bitcoin. And without the security codes, the currency becomes worthless. And so that seasoned manager who had that $25 million portfolio worth of Bitcoin begins laundering it through shady foreign transactions, cashing it in far below its value because of his fears that his owner's codes were some of the ones that had been stolen. Now, the investor charged with managing the $15 million portfolio began fiddling with the kinds of investments that made it up. And he made the crazy decision to put a huge amount in the ever volatile pork bellies commodities market. And as the price of bacon fell precipitously due to a glut in pig births in both China and eastern North Carolina, the manager couldn't get out of the commodities market fast enough, and he lost half of that with which he had been entrusted. Finally, the young Harvard graduate, fearful of his newfound authority and responsibility, took those real estate holdings and simply left them alone, making changes only when his hand was forced. And by doing that, he was able to preserve the owner's total value. And when the owner returned after 6 months of sailing the world, he called a meeting of his team. And the first spoke up, explaining the Bitcoin crisis and all that he had lost. And the owner was furious and fired him on the spot, chastising him for his rash behavior. The second manager spoke up, explaining the pork bellies commodities situation and how much he had lost because of it. And the owner, now fuming, castigated this investor on the spot for his recklessness, also firing him. And then the third manager spoke. He had explained that he had seen how the world was beginning to shape up, and so he had acted very conservatively. He had turned inward and had been able to retain the value of the investments even as the market dropped. Now the owner, pleased with the young manager's shrewdness, rewarded him with a position in his own company and a big lunch at the posh steak house around the corner. Now, this is what we might expect to hear if you or I were to tell a story like the one in today's gospel lesson. We look suspiciously at risky behavior, never quite sure whether the risk taker is just crazy or actually brilliant. Yet the parable that Jesus tells is the opposite of our parable. In Jesus' parable, the risk takers are rewarded and the cautious are dressed down. Risk pervades this parable that Jesus tells. First, the owner himself takes a huge risk by entrusting his resources to his managers, these servants, to handle his money. Scholars postulate that a talent was worth about what the average wage earner would make in 15 years of labor. So the master in the parable is indeed entrusting the same kind of unfathomable amounts as did the businessman in our own parable. Next, the two servants who took chances and did something with the money entrusted to them. They lucked out, or they were skillful investors, one of the two, and in the end, they ended up growing their purses. And instead of punishing them for this risk, the owner rewards them. However, the servant who conservatively buried the money to protect it, he's the one who is thoroughly punished. Jesus is apt to point out that parables are meant to be descriptive in some way of what the kingdom of God is like. And so we ask ourselves when we hear a parable, what then is this parable? And today, what then is this parable of risk and possibility telling us about kingdom living in the here and now? Because remember that the kingdom isn't just some future reality. Jesus says that in his very self, the kingdom has drawn near. Perhaps then, this parable is urging us to step out into the unknown and see what happens. At the same time, it is important to remember that this expectation does not mean that we're called to be simply foolish. Risks make us uneasy for good reason. In risk, we find ourselves either walking off the edge to our demise as the cliff crumbles away beneath us, or if we're shrewd, we step out and find firm ground growing to support our steps out into the unknown. Some cliff edges should be avoided. Warning signs declaring their danger should be posted. Yet, others hold opportunity and beckon us to come closer, despite the apparent risk involved. The life of the faithful as we seek to usher in the kingdom of God isn't one that is always, or even often for that matter, comfortable and easy. God takes risks on us, entrusting us with a host of talents for the upbuilding of God's reign and people, giving us complete freedom to use them well or not. And for how we use these gifts, we will be held accountable. So then, do we act with our resources as if we are afraid of God? Do we turn inwards, guarding ourselves against every outside force that might prove challenging, turning our backs then on the world and its needs? Do we live in fear of risking something that has become too precious to us? And in our efforts to be shrewd, we end up simply fading into irrelevancy. Or do we allow ourselves to be stretched, to take chances for the sake of the kingdom, for the spread of the good news? As we seek to engage God's mission in this place and with this people here at Holy Trinity, will we fall back on our cautiousness, or will we follow down a brave new path already begun with your expansion and renewal campaign? Ministry, as you've known it, costs a whole lot of money. This is a big place with unlimited potential, but we can't be who God is calling us to be, who Greensboro needs us to be, if we can't do more than afford to simply keep the lights on and the water out. We have to dream bigger. We have to dream bigger than that, for the sake of Holy Trinity, for the sake of the generations that will come after us, and for the sake of a hurting world now. How then will each of us use our own resources to make the church ever more ready to be who God is calling us to be and to do what God is calling us to do? Will we step out, trusting in God, the very ground of our being, after all, to be our firm footing even in the face of impossibility? Or will we step back, trusting only in what we know and fearing a God who does indeed hold us accountable? I, for one, hope that we keep on living at the edge, because that's where all the excitement is.